direi di cominciare subito con il primo ospite, che se mi permettete è anche il più prezioso, perché si tratta di un testimone, di un sopravvissuto alla Shoah, oltre che di un eminente scienziato. Quindi chiederei al professor Ivan Leifkovitz di salire qui sul palco. Allora, il professor Ivan Leifkovitz è nato nel 1937.
Now, Professor Ivan Leifkovitz was born in 1937 in Prešov in Slovakia. He is a Swiss citizen, and here in Switzerland he worked for many, many years. So, as I said before, he's top scientist. After the war, he continued his studies, graduated at the University of Prague in chemistry, then a couple of years of research at the International Laboratory of Genetics and Biophysics in Naples. So he understands Italian. Then he was to Germany, and then back in the 1960s he came to Switzerland. In 1969 he created the Immunology Institute that he's managed for many years, but also working in the labs of the hospital. The Basel University Hospital getting important acknowledgements for his work. Now, concurrently, he kept creating meetings, conferences and exhibitions, because this was a very strong desire that he had. I mean, conveying, the memories and the experience of the concentration camps. In fall 1944, Ivan was 7, together with Elizabeth, his mother, and the bigger brother, Paul, 15 years old. They've been arrested by Gestapo and deported to Ravensbrück. Now, the professor told us about this many times. Can you please tell us again what happened to you and to your family between fall 44 and April 45, when eventually and at last the liberation came?
I would like to thank you for inviting me to this place, and I would like to thank you for interviewing me. And not only that, but it seems that you prepared very well, the subject. Io non posso parlare italiano, sono stato 50 anni fa a Napoli, capisco tutto, ma mi mancano parole, non posso dire questo che vuoi, e per questo continuo inglese. Italiano e mani è molto buono, inglese è debole. So, I would like to continue in English. From the introduction, you know also my age, which is a convenient thing because we are going to talk about the 80th year of end of Shoah, 80th year of Auschwitz liberation. And I am now, as already you see from the flower which I got, I am 88 years old. So I was 8 years old when all this ended. So 80 and 8 is that. Now, I am going now to tell you my story. When I am telling it, you should be aware that whatever I tell you, this is not really Holocaust. It's one small mosaic stone of Holocaust. I cannot, and I'm not able, and nobody is able to tell a story of the Holocaust, because it is a picture which we are forming now, and still the generations to come will have to make the picture of that one. is Holocaust. So I start straight away with my story, and after I finish, then I will come back to the issue of Slovakia, of the Czech land, and about the political situation which they continue. But to make it really comprehensive, I start with the day when we were arrested. It was in autumn, end of October 1944. Gestapo came with Slovak milice, and the milice army was called Linková garda, which is very important to notice that every regime which is suppressing democracy, they also start to prepare a milice, a guard who will help them when the right moment comes to suppress people's rights. So Gestapo alone would not be able to find all these people. But at 4 o'clock in the morning, Gestapo and the Linková garda came and arrested several people. Among them was my mother, my brother Paul, and me. At that time, and I will come to that again only at the end, my father at that time was in Budapest, and he was killed in Budapest. So the story, instead of taking the whole family, is a story of 3 people, and that is when we were arrested. For a few days we were at the Gestapo, and they were preparing a train, a deportation train, which usually contains something like 700, 1,200 people, and that train then leaves the place. In our wagon, we had barely place to sit down. It was already very cold. We got some food with us, and we got a container, an empty container for getting the excrements from during the journey. We left Prešov, and the journey took several days. Here I have to explain the word several days, which I will repeat. You will find out it will come at several occasions. If people ask me how long was the journey to Ravensbrück, I say, well, something like 4 or 5 days. So how come that I'm unable to say that it took 4 days? And then I realized that with many survivors, it is so that at a certain extreme situation, one is losing the orientation of the time. One knows what is happening, but since one is in a wagon where it's dark and it's daylight not coming in, and one falls asleep and on the floor or in the or touching a nearby person, so the time gets lost, and when we arrive, we already after these 4 days, we didn't know exactly whether it was 4 days. The Ravensbrück was a women concentration camp, but at the end of, towards the end of the war, autumn 1944, the regular separation of women and men, women going to Ravensbrück, men to Sachsenhausen. That already broke down. They didn't have enough trains to bring people to the right place. So they opened up within the women's camp, they opened up a small men's camp. And this is a small issue, but it's for us, unfortunately, of very sad importance, because as we were registered and we got our numbers, then my brother, 5, almost 6 years older than me, was separated from us and taken to the men's camp, while I, as a 6 or 7 years old boy, had a possibility to stay with my mother. In Ravensbrück, the conditions were such as we from literature know about concentration camps. We know about the so-called appels, where people had to get up, had to stand from roughly like 4 o'clock in the morning until something like 8 o'clock, so for several hours, and which itself is very daring. And then the women had to go to work. My mother, after a while, realized that the calories are not enough to survive upon it. So there was a possibility, and she used it, that one could, if one was strong enough, and my mother was, to go to so-called Außenkommando, to the outside commandos, where they worked heavily outside of the camp. They came back totally exhausted, going to sleep, and the next morning again the same. But these people who did this commando, they got an extra bowl of soup, and that she did for me. So, in fact, her enormous exhaustion was something which was for my own benefit, and all this time there, since I'm very soon, in 2 or 3 minutes, I'm going to talk about the evacuation to something which was so much worse than that what we had in Ravensbrück. So I consider Ravensbrück, and it's not very fair to say, but in an orderly camp. We had, each of us had a place where we could sleep. We did get still some regular food, very little, so we were constantly losing weight. But still, if this would have continued like that, there was a chance to survive. We got also, we were vaccinated. If somebody was ill, he could get an aspirin, but no other care. And then, and people started to die. But this dying is interesting because we knew each person who was dying. The dying person still had a name. He was carried out of the barrack and was removed, and we mourned for him, and we said, this and this person, what a pity he died. It was still something which one could continue to consider that we were alive. Then came a moment when the war conditions outside in Europe became, for the German, much less favorable, and then came a moment when they decided that the part of the camp to which also we belong will be evacuated. And we, of course, we didn't know what it meant. The word evacuation was not used, but we were just displaced to another temporary tent where people were taken usually when something bad happened, and that something bad could be that they were shot, they were sent to another camp, they were somehow, let's say, exterminated. But in our conditions, it was clear that there will be an evacuation, and the evacuation was to a concentration camp, Bergen-Belsen. This transition were both on cars and trains, and a certain portion, a considerable portion, was a march on foot. That is what later got the name Todesmarsch, Death March. I was already very weak, and I simply didn't manage it. And there was a young lady, a girl, she was 19 years old, and she had to carry me on her shoulder. I was not weighing already a lot, so it was not so heavy, but still. And that was going on again, we don't know exactly for how many days, but for several days, until we arrived at the Bergen-Belsen. In Bergen-Belsen, the impression was just a pure horror. On the road along from entry to the barracks where we were placed, they were on the road corpses of people. They were dying and were not, and there was not a possibility anymore to bury them. Very often the SS made commandos which were supposed to remove these corpses, and these commandos were so weak, these people, that while they were pulling away the corpses, they themselves died. So they were just buried under these corpses. We were put, or we were taken to a barrack, and as every newcomer, as we entered the barrack, we were greeted with a great aversion. They didn't want to have us because the barracks were already overfilled. They were coming on new and new trains almost every day, and they practically didn't allow us to enter. But finally we had to. We came in, and then we realized two things. First of all, we realized that they didn't want to have us because the food which was distributed was a constant amount of food, irrespective of the people present in there. So every new person meant less, a smaller portion for people in that barrack. And then we realized that a few days passed, and they arrived new people, and now we were extremely adverse to them, and we didn't want to have them exactly as they didn't want to have us before. Now we were fighting, not that we don't want to have anymore. And these people could not even move from the bed, if you could call it, the places where we bunkers where we could sleep. And then these people didn't have even often enough strength to climb down, and the disaster started when the death within the barracks reached such a stage that we were sleeping among the dead bodies. And if somebody at one fire had diarrhea, then it was falling on us below. Everybody was infested and was dirty, it smelled, and it was not possible, in fact, to function. The Bergen-Belsen is very different from other camps, because there is no other camp which was so overcrowded. As you envisage the map of Germany, it is on relatively far west of the country, and as the Russian troops moved, there were more and more camps which were dissolved, and which were then when the people came to the, should I a little more? Okay, sorry. So it was a situation in which we were quite desperate. It was dangerous to get out. Certainly, it was dangerous to get out alone. We went. I went to with my mother out, and there was a situation where even to go to a toilet outside was in fact life dangerous. People lost all inhibitions and were stealing from each other. It was conditioned where all the humanity broke down. And then came a situation which is probably the worst of all, that came a day, April 4, 1945, when the Germans decided to give up the camp. Not that they gave up themselves, but they just locked the camp, blew up the water supply, stopped electricity, and we were left on our own. As we know, all of us here, that people survive without water not longer than 4 days. That is in fact physiologically impossible. But in fact, we survived 11 days without water. It's of course not completely like that, because when they stopped the camp, there were some people who were stronger. They climbed over the fence, they disappeared, and some of them came back with potatoes. And potatoes contain sort of water. It's a wonderful thing, but not for us very weak ones like my mother and me. We didn't succeed to get one single potato, but we did get the peelings from these potatoes, which we were putting on our lips, and they supplied the minimal humidity. I don't have memories of the individual barracks, also I decades later visited the place, but one thing remained in my memory throughout, all the time, day and night, and that was something which is called a fire distinguisher basin, like a swimming pool, full of water. And we didn't have enough water, and there was full of water. it was accessible, everybody could go there. But in that pool, in that basin, were swimming already corpses, dead bodies, with excrements coming out from their bodies. And the general know-how, and especially from my mother, came, Ivan, don't drink that. It's deadly. And a lot of people, in spite of that warning, they drank and they died. So we were without water, and then came the moment when the British army liberated the camp. They succeeded to get all the German wards and people who were running the camp, and there was later on a big trial which is called the Bergen trial, and I maybe come back to that issue. In any case, it was a moment when a jeep, American jeep with British soldiers, and with next seat and SS with the detached epaulets, and were going through the camp. And we have shouted from our last strengths, we are free. But in fact, it was quite meaningless, because they made the turn and they left again, because they realized that there are such conditions which they are absolutely unable to cope with. And it took another 48 hours until the British succeeded to bring in huge cisterns of water, install them like we see today when there is a fire extinguishing brigade which rolls out tubings, and finally we had enough water. So British army tried the best, then we got something to eat. The eating was never a problem was liquid. And then they organized a special place, an SS school, which was converted into a lazaret, and we were taken into that place, and then we slowly recovered.
Thank you so much. Now, that was 80 years ago. So 1945, that was exactly 80 years ago. Now, what does this mean, living with all of these memories for as many as 80 years?
The problem is that we consider certain days as symbolic. 15th of April, we were liberated. My mother and I, as you pointed out when we talked privately, we celebrated for years 17th of April, because we celebrated the moment when we got the first shuk of water. And even then, I was not able to distinguish it very clearly, because the dying continued. The dying, it's not so as fortunate for those 3 hostages which were released, and some before, and I hopefully that many more and maybe all will be. But for them it's a precise day and precise hour, because either those who didn't survive the terrible, but those which survived, they know this is the moment when starts our new life. In our case, this was not the case. And if I may say, just that you understand, next to me was another mother and child mother was called, her first name Marta, the boy was called Shiki, and they survived like my mother and me. We didn't know what happened to my brother, that I will probably say later. So this was, they survived and we survived. We were taken to the Lazaret, and my mother and me survived, and Shiki and his mother, unfortunately his mother died. So at least we became, with my mother, a new unit of life, while there was a boy who was completely alone, and he is still alive, living in Switzerland. It's my good friend. So for me, I must say, people ask me this question, and I very honestly say that for me, the feeling of liberation came in the moment when in the Lazaret, where we were recuperating and getting new strength, when on the whiteboard was written on 6th of June, April, May, June, 6th of June was written, today nobody died. That was for me as a child, when everybody around said, today nobody died. That is when my feeling of liberation.
Now, what do you think about this very difficult situation that we have right now, especially for the Jewish world?
I cannot distinguish between, besides that what I said, 17th of April and 6th of June, our worry was whether we are going to survive. Incidentally, maybe you know from literature, that after such terrible things, children recover better, recover faster than adults. Either they died or they recovered. So I recovered, but the problem is that my mother, who recovered also much slower than I, she did not believe that I recovered. She's only said, Ivan looks okay, but probably it only is, he might drop dead immediately, which were the cases. So about the feelings of liberation, it is a retrospective act from knowing that I have a new strength, I can do some steps, I can run. Then I say I am free. And then of course all this joy was not real, because I did have a very close relationship to my brother Paul, and we didn't know what happened to him. I realized that whenever I believed naively as a child that he will reappear, even months after, even after return to Czechoslovakia. And whenever I asked my mother what happened with Paul, and I have seen her that she started to cry, then I realized that he's probably not alive. So that is the thing that people keep asking me, when is the day when you really felt that it's over, and what were you feeling? So certainly not when the American jeep came into the camp and we were shouting we are free, because that thing within few hours stopped when they left again. So let's make it a little bit more comprehensive. Let's say that the liberation started for us still on the 17th of April with the first shlook of water.
Okay, very last question for you, Professor. What is the strongest, the deepest message that you would like to convey to the rest of the world, and especially to the youth, because they are the future of the world?
So, since I lived through all these things, not only in the camp, but also years after that, and maybe if we, I don't know how many minutes we have still to be able to talk, maybe in private, I just want to say that for me, the real learning process started when I was already free back to Czechoslovakia, and only when I have seen that the hatred against Jews did not stop, that how could a child react if going with his mother, a third person approaches and says, Mrs. Leifkovitz, you came back, you returned. They promised us that nobody returns.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much for this witnessing.
One should stop at the right moment, and this is the right moment to stop. Whoever wishes to learn more and wants to get in touch with me, I'm available. I believe that we can transmit messages only from man to man. The literature, what happens with the second generation and all this, is a question, but I give all my heart to that, what I can tell at present, and I cannot be worried about that, what will happen in future.
C'è anche un libro